Welcome to True Crime Cases today. We are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. Amaya's story began in a quiet suburban neighborhood where she grew up as the only child of Malcolm and Eliza. Seemingly ordinary family, her parents were loving and protective, deeply rooted in their conservative values. Malcolm worked tirelessly to provide for his family, often spending long hours at construction sites, while Eliza was the quintessential homemaker, ensuring their home was always a sanctuary of warmth and order. They raised Amaya with the hope that she would one day follow traditional path, education, career, marriage, and children. Amaya, however, had always been different from a young age. She displayed a strong sense of individuality, often choosing to follow her own interests rather than conform to societal expectations, while other girls her age were playing with dolls or fantasizing about Prince Charming. Amaya was drawn to something entirely different. She was captivated by movies, particularly those featuring mature male leads who exuded confidence and strength. It started subtly at first. It was harmless admiration. She found actors like George Clooney and Sean Connery more appealing than the younger heartthrobs her peers adored, while her friends plastered their bedroom walls with posters of boy bands and teen idols. Amaya secretly kept cutouts of these older actors tucked away in a box under her bed. To her, there was something magnetic about their presence, something that made her feel safe yet excited. By the time she reached high school, Amaya's preferences began to stand out. Her friends would gush about cute classmates or celebrities in their 21s, but Amaya would roll her eyes and dismiss their crushes as immature. "They're just boys," she'd say, laughing. "They don't know what they're doing." Her friends chalked it up to her quirky personality, never suspecting the deeper obsession brewing within her. As she grew older, her fascination with mature men turned into a fixation as she found herself daydreaming about teachers, coaches, and even the fathers of her friends. She didn't act on these feelings, but they lingered in her mind, shaping her understanding of attraction and relationships. When Amaya turned 24, everything changed. She was finally old enough to act on her desires, and she wasted no time exploring her attraction to older men. Her first relationship was with a 43-year-old divorce she met at a coffee shop. He was charming, confident, and everything she had imagined an older man would be. For Amaya, it was thrilling, validation of the fantasies she had nurtured for years. Her friends, however, were horrified. "Amaya, are you serious?" one of them exclaimed when she revealed her relationship. "Hume, twice your age. So what?" Amaya replied nonchalantly, "Age is just a number, but what do you even have in common with him?" "It's not about common interests," Amaya said with a sly smile. "It's about how he makes me feel." Her friends didn't understand, but Amaya didn't care. She was finally living the life she had always wanted, and nothing could convince her otherwise. Over the next few years, Amaya dating life became increasingly unconventional. She actively sought out older men, often frequenting bars and social events where they were likely to be. She had a type: men in their 42s or 53s, preferably with salt and pepper hair and a rugged, weathered look. She wasn't interested in their personalities or life stories. What mattered to her was their experience and confidence. Her relationships were intense but short-lived. Amaya wasn't looking for commitment or emotional intimacy. She was driven by a need for physical connection. Her sexual appetite was insatiable, and she believed that only older men could satisfy her. For Amaya, It was more than just ATT traction. It was an obsession, a psychological craving that consumed her. Her friends grew increasingly concerned as Amaya behavior became more reckless. She would brag about her conquests, laughing about the reactions she received when people found out her preferences. You should see their faces when I tell them I only date men over 41, she said one night, giggling. Amaya, this isn't normal. One friend said her, tone serious, you're going to regret this someday. Why? Because I'm not chasing after clueless boys like you, Amaya retorted. Please, I know what I want, and I'm not ashamed of it. Her parents, meanwhile, were blissfully unaware of Amaya. Double life, Malcolm and Eliza believed their daughter was focused on her studies and socializing with friends. They occasionally brought up the topic of relationships, hoping Amaya would eventually settle down with someone respectable. One evening during dinner, Malcolm casually asked, so Amaya, are you seeing anyone these days? Amaya froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. No, Dad, she said quickly. Nobody special. You're a beautiful girl, Eliza added with a smile. You'll find the right person when the time comes. Amaya forced a smile, nodding in agreement. Inside, she was relieved. They hadn't pressed further. She knew her parents would never approve of her choices, and she wasn't ready to face their judgment. Despite her parents' obliviousness, Amaya's lifestyle began to take a toll on her relationships with others. Her friends, unable to condone her behavior, started to distance themselves. Amaya, however, didn't care. She was too consumed by her desires to notice the growing rift between her and the people who cared about her. By the time Amaya turned 23, she had fully embraced her obsession. Her body count had surpassed 210, and she wore it like a badge of honor to her. It was proof of her independence, her refusal to conform to societal norms. She saw herself as a free spirit, unbound by the expectations of others. But beneath her confident facade, Amaya was spiraling out of control. Her obsession had turned into an addiction, one that dictated every aspect of her life. She no longer cared about the consequences of her actions or the impact they had on others. For Amaya, nothing mattered except the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of her desires. Her parents remained in the dark, still believing their daughter was the sweet, innocent girl they had raised. But the truth was far more complicated, and it was only a matter of time before their worlds collided in a way that would change everything. Amaya's obsession with older men had reached its peak. By the time she turned 24, she no longer hid her preferences from her friends, who had either distanced the L's or reluctantly accepted her as she was. For Amaya, this life wasn't just a phase. It was her identity, her rebellion against societal norms and expectations. But her parents remained blissfully ignorant, still believing their daughter was living a quiet, respectable life. The bubble of secrecy began to strain when Malcolm and Eliza decided it was time to discuss Amaya's future. One evening over a quiet family dinner, Malcolm broached the subject cautiously. Amaya, he said, his voice steady but curious, you're 24 now. Have you thought about settling down, maybe dating someone? Seriously, Amaya forked paws midair. She had expected this conversation eventually, but it still caught her off guard. She composed herself quickly, masking her initial irritation with a dismissive laugh. Settle down, she said, pretending to be amused. I'm too young for that, Dad. I have my whole life ahead of me. Eliza chimed in, her tone gentle but firm. You don't have to get married right away, sweetheart. But it wouldn't hurt to think about your future, would it? Maybe find someone who shares your values, someone you can build A life with Amaya. Smile tightened. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not interested in anyone right now, she said, hoping to end the conversation. Malcolm and Eliza exchanged a glance, but didn't press further. They trusted their daughter and believed she would make the right choices when the time came. But the truth was far from what they imagined. Amaya's double life remained hidden until one fateful night. She had been out drinking with her friends, celebrating one of their birthdays. The night was lively, filled with laughter, music, and an endless flow of alcohol. As the hours passed, the conversations grew more personal, eventually steering into the realm of relationships and intimacy. One of Jan's friends, already tipsy, leaned forward with a mischievous grin. "All right, let's play a game," she said, slurring her words. "Slightly body count, everyone shares their number, no judgment." The group erupted in laughter. Though a few hesitated, one by one they began sharing their numbers, each met with a mix of teasing and playful shock. 5-1. "Friend," said, shrugging. 10. Another admitted, earning a round of applause. 15. Someone else confessed, blushing slightly when it was Jan's turn. She smirked, emboldened by the alcohol coursing through her veins. 200, she said, casually taking a sip of her drink. The room fell silent. Her friends stared at her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and horror. 201 of them repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "Amaya, are you serious?" Amaya laughed, leaning back in her chair. "What can I say? I have a type. Older men over 40. They're the only ones who know what they're doing." The shock in the room was palpable. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react. "Amaya, that's not normal." One friend said cautiously, "You're only 22. How did you even—" "Why does it matter?" Amaya interrupted, her tone defensive. "I like what I like. You don't have to understand it." Another friend, clearly uncomfortable, tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The mood of the evening had shifted, and Amaya's revelation hung heavy in the air. News of Amaya's confession spread quickly among her social circle, eventually reaching someone who knew her parents. Concerned for Malcolm and Eliza, this person decided to share what they had heard. The information devastated them. Malcolm, who prided himself on being a protective father, was stunned. He couldn't reconcile the image of his sweet, innocent daughter with the stories he was hearing. Eliza, meanwhile, was heartbroken, unable to understand how Amaya could keep such a secret from them. When Amaya returned home that evening, still slightly buzzed, she found her parents waiting for her in the living room. The tension in the air was suffocating. "Sit down," Malcolm said, his voice cold and firm. Amaya hesitated, but complied, her heart racing as she noticed the grave expressions on their faces. "We need to talk," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "We heard some things tonight, Amaya, things we never thought we'd hear about our daughter." Amaya's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what they were talking about. "Is it true?" Malcolm demanded, his voice rising. "Is it true that you've been involved with older men, that you've done these things?" Amaya's first instinct was to deny everything, but the alcohol in her system made her bold. She met her father's gaze and said, "Yes, it's true." "So what?" Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Malcolm, meanwhile, looked like he had been punched in the gut. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "How could you betray everything we've taught you, everything we stand for?" "Betray?" Amaya shot back, her own temper flaring. "I didn't betray anyone. This is my life, my choices." "Your choices?" Eliza cried. "Do you have any idea how this reflects on our family on us. I don't care, Amaya shouted, standing up. I don't care about your reputation or your conservative values. I'm not you, and I never will be. Malcolm clenched his fists, his face red with anger. You've destroyed yourself, he said through gritted teeth. You've destroyed this family. Amaya laughed bitterly. Destroyed? No, Dad. I'm just living my truth. Maybe it's time you faced yours. The argument continued late into the night, each side growing more entrenched in their anger and pain. By the time it ended, the family was fractured, their once strong bond reduced to shards of resentment and betrayal. But the worst was yet to come. A few weeks later, Malcolm and Eliza decided to visit Eliza's mother, leaving Amaya alone for the weekend. Seizing the opportunity, Amaya invited two of her latest partners over, both men in their mid-40s. She was determined to make the most of her freedom, indulging in the lifestyle that had become her obsession. The evening began with drinks, laughter, and flirtation, quickly escalating into a night of hedonistic pleasure. Amaya was in her element, completely unconcerned about the consequences. Unbeknownst to her, Malcolm and Eliza had decided to return home early. When they arrived, the house was dark except for a faint light coming from Amaya's room. Hearing unfamiliar voices and muffled laughter, Malcolm's suspicions were immediately aroused. What's going on? He whispered to Eliza as they climbed the stairs. When they opened the door to Amaya's room, the scene that greeted them was beyond anything they could have imagined. Malcolm and Eliza stood frozen in the doorway of Amaya's bedroom, their eyes widening in horror at the scene before them. Amaya was on the bed, completely uninhibited, tangled with two men old enough to be her father. Dim lighting from the bedside lamp illuminated bottles of alcohol and discarded clothing scattered across the room. The room are of sweat, alcohol, and betrayal. The two men, startled by the sudden intrusion, scrambled to cover themselves. One muttered something about leaving while the other grabbed his pants and bolted for the door. The sound of hurried footsteps and the front door slamming echoed through the house. But Malcolm and Eliza were rooted to the spot, their focus entirely on Amaya. Amaya, still heavily intoxicated, was slow to comprehend what had happened. She sat up, her movements slugged, and met her parents' horrified gazes with a mixture of defiance and drunken apathy. What is this? Eliza stammered, her voice trembling. Malcolm's face twisted in fury as he pointed toward the now empty doorway. Who were those men? What the hell are you doing, Amaya? Amaya laughed bitterly, the alcohol loosening her tongue. What does it look like, Dad? I was having fun. Eliza's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. This is what you call fun, with men like that in our home? Amaya rolled her eyes, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Oh, come on, Mom. Don't act so shocked. You knew I wasn't some perfect little princess. Malcolm's fists clenched, his knuckles white as he fought to control his rage. How long has this been going on? He demanded. How long have you been doing this? Amaya smirked, leaning back against the headboard. Oh, you mean, how long have I been sleeping with older men? Let's see. About 2 years now, and guess what? I've lost count of how many. 200, maybe more. Does that make you proud, Dad? The room fell silent. Eliza let out a strangled sob, collapsing onto the floor, her hands clutching her chest as though the revelation had physically wounded her. Malcolm's face turned a deep shade of red, his chest heaving as he struggled to process what he had just heard. 200, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Amaya nodded, her expression a mix of defiance and mockery. Yeah, 200 give or take all older men by. The way men who actually know what they're doing stop it, Eliza screamed, her voice filled with desperation. Stop saying these things. But Amaya wasn't done. She stood up, swaying slightly as she faced her. Parents, why should I stop? This is who and this is what I want. And you can't change me. Malcolm's rage finally boiled over. You've destroyed yourself. He spat. You've destroyed us. You're a disgrace to this family, Amaya. Disgrace. Good. Amaya shot back, her voice dripping with venom. I don't want to be part of this family. Anyway, you're just a bunch of uptight, judgmental hypocrites. Malcolm's vision blurred with rage. He lunged toward Amaya, grabbing her by the shoulders. You don't deserve to be in this house, he shouted, shaking her violently. Dad, let go of me, Amaya screamed, trying to break free. But Malcolm's anger had consumed him. He pushed her backward, her head striking the large mirror on the wall with a sickening crack. Glass shattered on impact, shards arcing down around her as she crumpled to the floor. Eliza screamed, rushing to her daughter's side. What have you done? She cried, cradling Amaya, bleeding head in her hands. Malcolm stood frozen, his hands trembling as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I didn't mean to, he stammered. I didn't mean to hurt her. Amaya eyes fluttered open briefly. Her breath shallow and labored. Blood trickled from a deep gash on her forehead, pooling on the floor beneath her. Mom, Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Stay with me, Amaya. Eliza sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Don't leave us, please. But Amaya's eyes slowly closed, her body going limp in her mother's arms. No, Eliza screamed, rocking back and forth as she held her daughter's lifeless body. No, no, no. Malcolm dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands. What have I done? He muttered, his voice choked with anguish. The room was silent except for Eliza's sobs and the faint sound of the wind outside. After what felt like an eternity, Malcolm reached for his phone and dialed 911. His hands trembled as he explained the situation to the operator, his voice breaking with every word. When the police arrived, Malcolm and Eliza were sitting on the floor, their faces pale and streaked with tears. They didn't resist as they were handcuffed and led out of the house. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Amaya friends testified about her lifestyle, painting a picture of a young woman who had become consumed by her obsession with older men. Malcolm's lawyer argued that the incident was a tragic accident, the result of a father's uncontrollable rage and disappointment. Eliza, who had not laid a hand on Amaya, was released on bail, but was forever haunted by the events of that night. Malcolm was sentenced to 15 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter, a sentence that many deemed lenient given the circumstances. But for Malcolm, no punishment could compare to the guilt and remorse that plagued him every waking moment in the years that followed. The once happy family became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked anger and unspoken truths. Eliza moved away, unable to bear